Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska, where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started. What's good, Alaska? This is Scott Levesque, and you're listening to the Daily Dose of the Must Read Alaska podcast. Hey, I'm sitting here on a Saturday, and I'm with James Kaufman. And before we get in, because this is going to be a great interview, I just want to say thank you guys. As we head into the holiday season, always want to thank our Must Read Alaska listeners, readers, and supporters. Without you guys, we would not be where we are, so thank you. And we are well on our way to getting 25,000 likes on Facebook, as well as 150 reviews on the Apple Podcast app. So if you hadn't had a chance to like us on Facebook or give us a 5-star review on the podcast app, we'd love for you to be able to do that because it just helps tremendously. So once again, thank you guys. And I'm excited today because I'm talking here with James Kaufman. James, thanks for joining with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks.
Absolutely. Listen, we talked maybe a year ago almost to the day. Very, very close. And you had just got in. You were elected. And you had a great campaign. We kind of, before we started recording, we talked about this with your wife. You two campaigned incredibly in a very blue district, and you guys won.
Well, I would say not a blue district. The South Anchorage, the District 28 that I was in, it's kind of a moderate R in aggregate.
Yeah.
To the extent that it was blue, it was a district in which Trump lost.
Right.
But I won. So other kind of nominally Republican districts, Trump won. So
sure.
A little tight on the margins, but we made it.
Awesome, yeah. And now you're a year, we're about a year from now. And so I think it would be great is you to just overall talk about your year that you've had, obviously a year under your belt. And what was that like? How has it been being in the position of the rep in Juneau, all of that? What's that kind of like for you since it's your first time?
Well, one thing that, people say, what surprised you? And I guess it's, there's a point where you realize that the weight of what you took on, you knew it, you imagined it, but there's a point where it actually becomes real.
Right.
And so, House districts as they were constructed in 28 when I ran the first time, you got 17-odd thousand people. You realize that, hey, there's 17,000 people who in the district and, 700 plus in the state that their hopes and dreams are in some way pinned to my decisions.
Right.
And you think, well, you're going to run for office, you ought to realize that. And I'm saying, yeah, you realize it intellectually. But if you got a heart, there's a point where you really feel it, and it's a deeper level, and there's more emotion in all of this than, and me, I'm kind of a practical, technical guy.
Sure. And
so for me to say that, my wife's probably in the background shaking her head, but yeah, you feel it.
Yeah.
And so that was weighty. And then also, there's the tension, and it's the tension of Alaska that's projected into the legislature because we were, in the end, a very divided House.
Yeah. And
we were that way by who was sent there.
Yeah.
And so everything that was seen with organizing, with about a month of grueling efforts to try and hold a majority, or to create one, there was a lot of work there that maybe people didn't realize, and so sometimes those people, they're not doing anything. Well, we weren't doing anything legislatively, but boy, was there a lot of work going on to try and define a majority that where we would have a Republican majority. It didn't hold.
Yeah.
And in part, though, that's the nature of the beast right now, how divided we are, where we have a House that could be so split where just a few people can make a difference.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I know a lot of people don't understand the background and what's going on because you don't see it, right? That's not being reported on, all the stuff. What you see is sort of the best headlines available. And as we've talked about, it's hard to discuss a paragraph when people are reading headlines.
Right.
It just it's easier sound bites when they're shorter and digestible. And one of the things that I saw in your time there over the last year is that you've been a man of your word. And in terms of a lot of things, but mostly what you promised on the campaign that you would do has been what you've held true to. And I think that's something that if, as moving forward, obviously, in re-elections and stuff like that, I think people can say that, my rep, James Kaufman, actually held to his word, which is great. How is it? I'm going to take a little bit of a different turn here. You've talked to me a lot. You spent a lot of time in your office. You're a busy guy. 12 hours, 10-hour days. Did you expect that type of, not just commitment, but time in your office?
I guess I did.
Yeah.
I've always been, in my career before I retired, I always kind of stuck with it, and I've been called a workaholic. And I don't know. I just think it's you do what you like, and it's fascinating. And what is even more compelling with this, when you do a job in the private sector, mm-hmm. usually it has a kind of a narrow focus.
Yeah.
In the public sector, I mean, you're hearing about fish problems. You're hearing about resource development. The spectrum of what you can get engaged with, and the desire to try and absorb all that, to have the best learning curve. I mean, you take this on, I tell people, well, I underpromised in that I didn't go in saying, hey, I'm going to do this. I said I'm going to go in and learn about this, and this is where I'm going to try and take us.
Right.
And so it's a good checklist, and it's one, like you said, that I can go down and I can say, here's what I said and here's what I did.
Right.
And it's very consistent. But what the core part of that, and I'm on the record on video, whatever, saying I need to go down there and find out, understand the problem more before I can give you a better solution.
Right.
And so that was that ask of myself, was that I just need to go down and absorb. So that's one reason why, I'm often, one of those lights on in the Capitol when,
drinking from a fire hose.
And maybe because everybody else already understands the issue and they don't need to be there. And,
sure.
But it's a learning curve your first year of you're really digging in.
Well, I think that was also refreshing, the fact that you're like, hey, listen, I don't have all the answers to all the problems, but I do need to understand them so I can have the best answer to the problems. And
to that, and you really do get access to information down there. I mean, some people like to discount our legal advice down there, and our financial advice that we get down there is that it's biased, and okay, I get it, but actually, if you get numbers on a spreadsheet and you're looking at them, they're numbers that you may not have had as a citizen in a density and complexity, and if you stare at all of it and you absorb it, you can figure out at least what you think about the facts as you have them.
And I think that's another key thing. We talked about this with the Alaska Policy Forum, is that a lot of times people don't realize that you have information to make the best possible decision. But not only just that, is that sometimes the public doesn't get all the information, not for some secretive stuff, but it's just like you're getting real-time information.
Yeah, unless the public wants to make a 12-hour job of it, and a lot of this information is hard to surface.
Yeah, I would say that. And to that point, let's transition to some of the policy stuff that you ran on and actually are implementing now. In the two areas I know, because I spent time with you on your campaign and we did a video and some other things, was you were looking at how do we get away from just reckless spending and actually manage that spending. And I used the word reckless, you didn't, but really kind of sure up our spending. And then the other thing is really kind of process management. Like, how do we improve processes? How do we improve that? And so I think a lot of people are interested in that because it affects their life. How much money we're spending and where that money's coming from is a big deal. And then secondarily, are we being economical? Are we being lean? Are we being efficient with how our processes, and that includes money? So can you talk a little bit about your time in Juneau and how you've really taken those two policies? And particularly, I know that you have something that has been really great when it comes to the process management and all that. So why don't you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. As a Republican, I ran a little bit of a different campaign than some. I did not focus on a specific PFD or promising a larger PFD. What I was explaining to people was my perspective that the PFD is a result of how well we're managing, and where we're putting our money. And if we were to get better control, if we were to try and drive down our costs while also pushing performance of agencies that are in the government, that we could, like a company that is reforming its processes and trying to do improvements, we could find out that basically we're profiting more. Well, in government, what that means is you're just not burning as much cash and you're still delivering the same product or maybe even a better product. So when I went down there, it was with the promise I would look for that,
right.
and that's what the focus has been. So the big first promise was that I was for a more effective spending cap.
Right.
We have one right now, and the dang thing would allow you to spend about double what we're currently spending. So that's not a cap on anything.
Right.
Then you also have people that look at the 5% POMV on our permanent fund, that caps what you can take, so that's an effective spending.
So when you say POMV,
percentage of market value,
there you go. Okay.
And that's probably something that deserves its own whole conversation. It gets complicated, but basically it's a system of averaging over a trailing 5 years of the permanent fund value, and then taking a 5% draw from that as a way to kind of level and modulate our draw from the permanent fund to,
and that's through a particular formula.
Yes,
that everybody talks about, the PFD formula.
It doesn't address how the money is split.
Sure,
it addresses what's taken out of it. So, but what some people do, they see that and they say, well, we have a cap because that's all we can pull out. And the problem is they're neglecting the rest of the economy.
Right.
So new taxes or So do we go tax the oil industry more? Well, that's not covered under that, right?
Right.
So, or do we create sales tax, income tax, all that? So, my focus was, first we need a good cap, and so what we designed, and when I say we, it's because there's staff involved and there's experts and people that you're working with, and so if I say I, it's just a mistake.
Sure,
it's we. So what we came up with was a cap that was based upon a percentage of our private sector economic performance.
Okay.
It says to the government, you can spend, and this is a constitutional amendment, you can spend up to X percentage of what the private sector is doing. Now, the reason for that is to keep the government linked to private sector performance. Mm-hmm. One of my big concerns is that as the permanent fund grows and it becomes, if you think of it as a trust fund that's funding government, well, if there's no reason for the government to care about the health of the private sector because it's already funded by the permanent fund,
right,
then what's to cause it to care about the kind of development that really creates prosperity? And
right.
And so that's, resource development projects, all of that. Now, it will still want the service sector, to just make life easier.
Right.
But how are we really going to grow and develop as a state? So with that spending cap, we're trying to control multiple things. One, the growth of government spending, to just not cut it drastically as much as just create a leveling process so that we don't overspend in times of peak revenues.
Right.
That's the boom bust story of Alaska. So what the cap does, it'll sweep forward billions by preventing them from being spent, rolls them into the future. And if we'd had it in place before, we would not have overspent on capital projects that were not maybe well sorted out, and we wasted money, or we create a boom in doing capital projects, which then later we can't afford to maintain.
Right.
Because I call it the lottery syndrome. So you win the lottery, you go build a big house, and then you find out, well, how much it costs to run and maintain that house.
Right. Lighting, water, the works. Yeah.
Maintenance. And so you have to pull, in periods of peak revenue, you have to pull down your spending more effectively than what we've been doing, which rolls those billions. We're talking billions. It's Carl Sagan money, billions and billions. It rolls it forward. And so my point being, a cap doesn't have to cut brutally if it just controls and because we make money. We just don't always do well with it, especially when we have a bunch of it.
Sure.
So so that spending cap is key, and it's an initiative. I'm going to keep going with it. We introduced it in multiple special sessions as, for me, the foundational thing. A good cap needs to be in place. At a time when we're talking about massive fiscal reform, all the issues that were surfaced during these special sessions about, are we going to have new taxes, or are we what are we going to do? And I'm saying, well, whatever you're going to do, have a dang good cap in place that's going to actually keep us from getting into trouble if we open up a new source of revenue. So if you want a sales tax to fund government and while doing a larger PFD, well, then you better figure out a way to keep that thing under control, because otherwise you're opening the barn and the horses are going to be out, and you'll be wondering what happened.
Right. And so to for those of you who are not familiar with sort of this whole idea, it's essentially saying we're going to spend no more than this amount. Anything over, we're going to put away in case of a rainy day or a capital project or port maintenance or ferry system or whatever it is. It helps provide a cushion.
Yeah, or for operating costs in a period of a shortfall.
Yeah,
and
totally.
So that's why so you can cap where just know that money, it's not being spent, and you might not even go out and seek the revenue.
Right,
that would be one thing. Or if you're able to sweep it forward and replenish the CBR, and so now you have a leveling mechanism.
Right,
and the end result of that as being better managed, just like a business.
Yeah.
So if you're better managed, you're more predictable. With this, having this 5-year rolling average of a spending estimate that's developed, as a result of this process, you have visibility on your future budgets. You don't have to guess.
Not only that, but you're able to plan better as well. It gives you foresight. That's, instead of being reactive, you can be much better at proactivity.
That's everything.
Yeah.
So if you think of the challenge of Alaska, so we're boom bust,
right.
And I sat on a plane with an old, longtime Alaskan, and he sat there and he told me from his perspective the whole story of the boom and bust in Alaska.
Right.
Everything from crabs to fur, and he said, we got up to oil, and he says, I don't know what the next one is, but it's coming.
Right.
And he could be right. I hope he is. But I hope when it hits, we have better process controls in place. Right. If you think of government as a process, just like a manufacturing or a chemical production process, if you have control limits that keep the thing from blowing up on you, right, or going haywire, you'll just manage better. And the things that we're fighting over now, had this been in place with like 18 billion swept into the future, and like 3 billion saved, and that's the constitutional limit, would have saved about 3 and would have swept 18 billion forward in time.
Right.
And what I'm referring to, on akrepkaufman.com, there is a page there, that's my website, and it has the spending cap explanation. So the graphs and the video and everything that explains this in more depth. So if this is too much to hear in just this hearing, there's more there at akrepkaufman.com.
Absolutely. And I think also the idea is that when you added revenue into the system of government, generally the idea is, well, we have more money, let's spend it. And that's not a great mechanism to use. It's more, now we have an additional sense of revenue. Let's look at how we can continue forward and keep our spending at where it's at. I mean, it's sort of like having a child who gets $2 and wants to spend it right away on candy, as opposed to saying, well, let's build up so you can either get something that you really want in the future versus just blowing your money.
It's the why can't we have nice things question.
Yeah, and this is why.
And in life, I joke, with Nancy sometimes about way back in time earlier in our married life when I pointed at a spreadsheet and I said, at this point X, we're going to retire with that. Right. And it was just simple spreadsheet. Yeah. And lo and behold, at that point that looked nuts. Yeah. But in the end, it was more than true. I mean, we did even better, and it was just from having good process controls, from earn as much as you can without risking your health or whatever. And as a state, we don't want to risk our environment. We don't want to risk all that, but we want to be well employed. Right. A lot of the social issues that we have, if people are better employed and they're in a state that's managed more for that steady state operating process and people are employed, we don't have boom bust cycles, or we can minimize the effects, the damage of them, then I think a lot of the things that we're fighting societally and then also economically at the point that we're at right now, we could have managed through some of those if we had processes that kept us within a better operating band.
Yes. I think that's totally reasonable, and I also think, once again, it's one of the things that you ran on that I see, at least if you're paying attention to the sessions, that you're constantly bringing up continuously. Another thing in that same policy mindset is process improvement. Mm-hmm. And how do we become better, more efficient, better processes so that, in essence, the money that we are spending is spending effectively and efficiently and not just, here you go. You're not throwing money at it and hopefully something sticks and then the rest of it just falls away. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe some initiatives that you've been working on?
Sure. And there's lots to tell there. We don't have enough time. I'm going to try and keep it brief. But, yeah, so as a candidate, I had my list of issues, and now as a representative, I have my checklist of, and where am I?
Right.
And so... And I'm pretty much there, but my goal is to say I'm doing everything that I said I would do.
Right.
And it's a weird feeling to look at it and say, well, I'm doing it. And so it's really important to me. I ran on the spending cap because I wanted to control spending. What we came up with was a spending cap that also has beneficial controls in that it keeps the government interested in the private sector.
Right.
So that's a great control mechanism. It's one thing if you're telling the government what you can spend. It's another if you're saying what you're spending is controlled by the health of our private sector.
Right.
And it's doing it without taxes. It's doing it by saying you can only spend a percentage of what the private sector is doing,
right?
Not what the permanent fund is doing,
right?
Of what our actual economy.
It keeps Alaskans free from possible state income tax, sales tax, and so forth.
And it marries the state to the performance of our private sector, which
is an incentive.
Which is an incentive. So not only is it a cap, it's a cap and a beneficial control.
Right.
It's beneficial ties, linkages, and so now we're making the government care about the private sector more than it will if it's a trust fund government operating on a $100 billion fund or 120 or whatever it gets to,
right?
Where all they care about are pizzas and bars, right? Or some tourism.
Right.
They don't care about the big stuff that really makes the big money and really employs a lot of people. That's our natural resource development.
Right.
So you've got that. So then, as we're controlling the money and making government care about our private sector economic performance, now let's work on how do we link our budgeting process with our performance management process.
Right.
Right now, we budget, so basically it's, well, what did we spend last year? Well, we're going to spend about that, and what are we going to do? Well, we're going to keep doing the same thing we've been doing. That's pretty much what the budget subcommittee, and then people quibble about, well, we want a few less positions here, or, oh, no, we want more positions. So it's left and right is having a tug of war around a piece of government and how many little widgets are in it or aren't, and then, so... It's not really productive. What we can do is create a much more performance-oriented, a goal-oriented, where you have, from like top to bottom, a coherent set of priorities that are being driven, mm-hmm. and then they're being driven and they're being touched upon at the budgeting process, and where you're doing a deeper look at the actual performance and the what. So what are we doing with this money, and are we getting our value out of it? Are we doing the right things? Are we on the right mission?
Right.
So it's a mission and performance type of management process. Now, I have not presented this yet, but it's in the works. So
okay.
that's coming. So you've got a good spending cap. Now that's going to be hard to get through, mm-hmm. Because you're talking a constitutional amendment, but I'm going to keep presenting it
sure.
and explaining it, and as I get more support from the public and from others, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Right.
We didn't get into our financial situation in a day.
Right.
We're dealing with problems that have been built up, since statehood, right?
Yeah.
Or before, at least over the past decade. So this is a long-term project. Then these process controls, so that's coming, and there's some pieces of it that are out there already. Mm-hmm. One of the little bills that we did was just a bill for document reduction. It tells the executive branch to take a look at all of the documents that you're producing, reports and all these publications and everything.
Yeah.
Take a look at them and see, A, what do you not need to produce anymore? What's not value-added information? And what, especially, do you not need to print anymore? It could be delivered electronically.
Right.
Simple little improvement. How much will it save? I don't know. But it's like the first step in just starting to say, hey, here's an area of improvement.
Right.
Another area that we did, and there was a bill, HB 63, that went through the House, and it was around the board that oversees the marine highway system. And there were efforts to try and make a better board that would be able to guide the marine highway system better. And so it's a majority bill. I'm in the minority, and we became interested in it, and so I started digging into it, and what we found is that we could put some actual improvement processes in there.
Sure.
So we started doing amendments, and so folks that aren't in the game in Juneau won't understand, but for a minority member to be able to push 10 plus amendments into the speaker's bill for the ferry system, which Speaker Stutes cares deeply about the marine highway system. It's the joke is fish and ferries, right? So if you're on Kodiak, it's big stuff. And I think at first there was is it a poison pill? Am I trying to ruin the thing or whatever?
Right.
I don't know if that was the thought, but we got a lot of interest where people started coming. But in the end, we got all of those amendments through to create a board that actually was competency based, not like a political type. We all have seen that.
Not bureaucracy.
It has a requirement that if it lacks a competency, that it report that out.
Right.
It gives them the ability to issue like a corrective action to say, hey, you've got to if you see a problem that, hey, fix this. It's a thing. So it created more like what you would see in a corporate world, where if you had a management responsibility where you actually had to have the competencies, and if you had a gap, you had to recognize that gap, and then you could actually say, hey, this really needs to be fixed, and issue a report on that. So that ended up getting baked into the House bill. Then we helped it get through the Senate. It's signed into law. So
nice.
It's not my bill, and the marine highway system sure wasn't one of my big issues. In South Anchorage, it's not a core issue. But that kind of improvement process of pushing that in. So it took a lot of work, but for a first year in the legislature, to be able to actually change statute in a way that's consistent with what I promised, and that's felt pretty dang good.
Well, not only that, it's a majority bill. It brings in some accountability, which is always good in government. Transparency is another great one. So I thought that was a huge win. You told me about that. I thought, man, that's a huge win, and a coup again to what you ran on and what you're trying to do. Obviously, the ferry system is a big topic right now.
Well, now, and the timing of it. So now this big influx of federal money coming
from the infrastructure bill, for sure.
And thankfully, that little bill, it one of the big problems we're going to have with all this infrastructure money is the oversight of it. And that goes right back to my boom bust thing. When win the lottery, get all this money, and how are we going to manage that?
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So that's a big area that we need to look at. Is better management of all this, so that we actually build what we need, and not more than, or we don't build poorly. Oversight's key.
That is going to be huge. Absolutely. Well, you've had some great, what your policy has been shown in what you've been doing, the tax cap. The spending cap, as well as the process improvement side of things. And again, it was timely, right? So this works out beautifully because we're getting this infrastructure bill and all this influx of billions of dollars that will go to the ferry system. And the fact that you have process improvement plans in place is kind of a nice deal.
Or coming.
Or coming, yes. But let's talk a little bit about what's next. Obviously, there was a whole redistricting that happened, and now your actual, like, where you're going to be campaigning, who you're going to be campaigning to has changed, correct?
Yes.
Pretty significantly.
Yeah, definitely. So, for those that were in my District 28, and those that were in Laddie Shaw's district, there's pretty much been a swap.
About 90% change, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I'm in a new district. It's more compact. It's the hillside and goes all the way down to the Seward Highway, but just a big rectangle. It's District 11E now. So for this year, so I'm still the representative of District 28.
Right.
And I've always viewed that as like primarily like hillside. It doesn't matter as much 28 or was it Laddie's district? There's a lot of similar issues. So,
right.
And there's overlap in the community councils and all of that. So I'm already very well plugged in with, the community councils
right.
and that. And the needs of the district. So, but I'm going to run again. I filed a letter of intent, and I'm doing fundraising. And the next one of those is on the 30th at Fox Hollow Golf Course.
What time is that at?
It's about 5:30 to 7:30.
Okay. So December 30th at
Fox Hollow Golf Course, which is right along the Seward Highway. Yep. It's the Dome.
Yeah.
It's the driving range, and they do soccer in there. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so we're looking forward to that. And some may say, well, the election is not until, next November. But you can't wait. You have, every 2 years, and you have to start to build. And then I'm going to be building awareness in my new district. So as rep, I have to manage, I have to be a good rep for District 28.
Right.
As candidate, I have to start to let District 11 know that, hey, I'm your rep now.
Right.
And all of us are busy, and if you're not plugged into politics, a lot of folks don't, the districts and all that, it's complicated.
And it's also name recognition again. With a 90% brand new district,
Yep.
They know Laddie. Some of them do. Now they've got to know you, and it's
there's
it's
doors,
a lot of work.
There's doors I haven't been to.
Yeah.
But actually going out and meeting people at their doors, calling them and talking to them, that's something, we did a great job of outreach in the last campaign.
You did. You and Nancy were phenomenal in that.
And we hit lots of doors and burned up lots of phone lines and had good conversations. So we're going to do that again. And I have some advantage now I'm in, but ethically, I can't use my office to campaign in any way. So I have to be, I have to do what I'm going to do, which is I have to represent my current district.
Right.
And I have to build awareness in my new district that this is coming. And we have ranked choice voting.
Yes.
That is going to be interesting. So I think candidates and citizens, all of us, we have to learn that ranked choice game.
Yeah.
We have to learn our new districts, and we're going to really have to get engaged and not be put off by all of that, because that will be a real opportunity for my opposition.
Yeah.
And I just like the last campaign, I have a very ideological, far left person running as an independent.
Right.
And
the independent route again. Love it.
Yeah. And so in my last race, I was running against Assembly member Suzanne LaFrance, who was marketed to the public as a fiscal conservative and the only logical choice for responsible governance. And
ironically, sandwiched between two conservatives, if you got the mailer, which was to say that was a lie would be kind, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm an elected official now, so I think the term is falsehood.
Yes, falsehood. Yes.
Yeah, but yeah. So basically, it was a contrived candidate, saying things that weren't true on both sides.
Right.
And so we're going to have that again. And it will be like the last one, I suspect, very well funded and very well coordinated with all the usual suspects.
Right.
There's every indication of that, with support, from the usual suspects. So it's gonna be a challenge, but I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I've got to go pull myself out of that a bit because when you're in Juneau, you're busy being the legislator,
right?
And so the campaign will really kick off when I come back, but we'll do what we can in the meanwhile.
Well, I think you've been a candidate that has held to your campaign promises, and I think you can say that. You've checked down the list. In addition to that, I think also people respect that, even though they may not always agree with every position. Like, you can't agree 100% with everything a candidate does. I think with the one thing that everybody can say is that what you ran on is what you're actually implementing or trying to in Juneau.
Yeah, I ran essentially on a balanced and reduced budgets, and so all of my decisions were around that.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room, that the size of the permanent fund dividend. There's folks that were concerned about the way I voted on that, but that wasn't my core promise. My core promise: let's get government under control,
right?
Grow the dividend through controls and improvement, because what I was worried about most, we have a wasteful government that would be enabled with new taxation, and we still would not have solved the problem.
Right.
And so that's tough because I'm talking about longer term things, and then others are focused on more short term solutions. Yeah. And in politics, arguing for a longer term solution is one of the hardest things in the world. The process is not aligned with that. It's aligned to the next vote, the next
absolutely, 100%.
So it's a little bit of a different way of proceeding, but it has the same goal. If we control what we're spending, and if we control better the performance of what we're getting out of that spending, then the prosperity that people are looking for in two areas, in the potential for a larger dividend and the growth of our private sector in ways that has been ignored. We've had a lost decade where we could have, we look at what Biden's doing now. We could have prepared for this by being more willing to enable development up on the slope when it was in our court in terms of tax policy or other things. So I think we can manage better. And out of managing better, we can get a lot more of what people are looking for.
Well, the ancillary benefits to that, like you said, are you stave off, the idea of an state income tax or the idea of sales tax, because what you're talking about, people focusing on the PFD. The longer term is you keep those types of tax revenues away from discussions because you have a healthy spending cap, which provides, like you were talking about, $18 billion rollover. $3 billion back into our CRO. All of that is just massive. But you're right. It goes back to paragraphs versus headlines, right? Everybody's looking for the next campaign slogan that they're doing, which effectively only answers short-term questions as opposed to long-term viability.
Yeah, and short-term needs are real. The thing that everybody eats in the short term,
right?
So I'm sensitive to all of it. The question is just how do we manage there, and how do we get to that point? And the other thing that happens is if we make short-term decisions that lock us into a certain mode. And my attitude was always, if you're going to talk about new taxes, let's have some serious cost and performance reforms in place. And so that was really the nut of it for me, is that we don't have that right now.
Right.
And so let's get a good cap in place. Let's get some performance management stuff in place. And let's start to, we were talking earlier about the idea of a cut versus a reform.
Right.
Reform and improve. That's how business does it. Businesses that just cut, a lot of times they're in crisis mode.
Right.
And so if you can be in improvement mode rather than crisis mode, that's a better way to get to something sustainable, because you don't have to make decisions that set you up for a long-term failure.
Right.
So it's not a bumper sticker, but I put the effort into having these conversations with people, and so generally people are surprised if they call me. I try to call them back. I can't hit 100%. If they send me an email, I try to respond as best I can. So I've had a lot of conversations with people about what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and the direction that we're steering in.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time. I think we've had great conversation. We're approaching 40 minutes, which is awesome. It flies by. But I appreciate it, James. Thank you so much for your time. And I just want to let people know that I actually, you're always a fun talk. I love getting to know what you're doing, and a lot of stuff you're working on. And like I said before, you really are a man of your word, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining with me today. Really love it.
Anytime.
Absolutely. Listen, if you haven't had a chance, we have great content out on mustreadalaska.com, so I want to encourage you to go ahead and go there. And if you want to support what we're doing and having great conversations like I just had with James, I would highly recommend you go to mustreadalaska.com, and in the upper right, there's a donation button there. You can, anything helps, because we want to make sure we're providing you with a well-rounded view of the news. Also, if you haven't liked us on Facebook or subscribed and hit the notification bell on YouTube, you can do that as well. Or you can find us on, here we go with the list, Parler, MeWe, Twitter, Rumble, all under the same handle, Must Read Alaska, all one word. Well, guys, thanks for joining with me. This was a great conversation. Yeah, James.
I just want to say Merry Christmas to everybody.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
And Happy New Year.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks, James, again. And guys, until next time, take care, Alaska.